So last video we talked about modeling operations of integers on a number line with adding and subtracting. So we're going to review a minute. There's your number line. Positive goes to the right, negative goes to the left. We remember that the car takes trips and the road is the number line, and it tells you where each integer tells you, or each number tells you where to go. So let's recap a little bit of adding and subtracting. Addition, each trip that the car took was put together and where the car ends. Subtraction, and we don't like to subtract, we needed to move forward when the car was positive integers and move in reverse when the car was negative integers. And hopefully you added these words to your note sheet. Now we're going to talk about multiplication. Now don't forget you do know your rules, so use your rules to make sure that your answers are correct. So multiplication in the car starts at 0, and we're taking many trips. And many is that key word you can highlight or underline that tells us that we're multiplying. So now we have the number of trips we're going to take times the distance of each trip, and that will equal up and we'll land where the car ends will be our final answer. Now sometimes we're going to have to use that commutative property as we did before to reorder the problem if we need to, because we can't have negative trips. So we might have to reorganize our problem and pull out that negative. Okay? So let's look at the first example. 2 times a negative 5. We're going to start at 0. And we're going to take 2 trips, and each trip is going to be negative 5. So 2 trips of negative 5. So there's my first trip. Stop at negative 5. And there's my second trip. Okay, so each time the distance was negative 5, but there were 2 of them. So I landed on negative 10. And you can double check this. There are 2 exact trips of each of a distance of negative 5. And your rule states 2 times 5 is 10, and a positive times a negative is a negative. So you can double check that with your rules. Now look at the next example. Okay, now let's look at the second example. This time we have a negative 2 times 3. Now, we can't have negative numbers of trips, so we're going to have to use the commutative property, and we're going to have to rewrite the problem. So let's go ahead right now and rewrite the problem to read 3 times negative 2. So now 3 becomes the number of trips. 2 becomes the distance each trip will travel. Each little arrow will be 2 in the negative direction, and then our answer will be where the car ends. So let's start at 0, and we're going to take 3 different trips, negative 2 apiece. So the first one goes to negative 2, second one goes negative 2 more, and the last one goes negative 2 more. So now we have 3 trips, and if you look at the arrows, 3, the number of trips is the number of arrows. And the distance of each trip is how far that arrow goes. So the answer to 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And you know because of the commutative property that negative 2 times 3 is also equal to negative 6. And you're going to check it with your rules. A negative times a positive, or a positive times a negative, is a negative, and 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, before we go on to division, take a look at multiplication again. The car starts at 0, so make sure that you're filling in your notes, and your notes say 0 is where you start. You take many trips, and that first number, the number of trips, is the number of arrows. Now let's take a look at division. Division. This is where the car will end at 0, so you can fill that out on your note sheet, and we're taking many trips. So, where the car starts, divided by the number of trips, equals the distance of each trip. This time we're going to end at 0, and we're going to start someplace else on the number line. Sorry. Let me just move that out of your way. Okay, take a look at the first example. -10 divided by 2. So -10 is where the car is going to start, and we are going to take 2 trips in equal distance. And that would mean we'd start at -10 and go to -5, and then 5 more would be at 0. So we're trying to get the car to end at 0. So each trip was -5, and there are a total of 2 trips. And you need to check this with your rules. First of all, a negative divided by a positive is a negative, so you can write the negative sign down. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. And since that's such an easy problem, you could already tell what each trip, the distance of each trip. Each is that keyword for division, like many is the keyword for multiplication. Let's take a look at the next example. I'm going to erase the board at the bottom. And the next example says 8 divided by -2. Now this is that problem again. Doing -2 trips. Can we do -2 trips? The car is going to start at 8, but we have to fix this problem. Okay, so we're going to have to rewrite this problem, 8 divided by -2. And we're going to rewrite it as -2 sorry, what I mean is we're going to have to take that negative out, and we're going to say it's the opposite of 8 divided by 2. That way we'll start at 8, and we'll have 2 trips of equal distance, and then we'll have to remember when we're done to go back and put the opposite in. And if you guys have done that before. So we've got 8. We're going to take 2 trips of equal distance and end up at 0. So each trip is going to be 4 spaces. And we're ending up at 0. So we're moving in the negative direction. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. But you know we're looking for the opposite of 4. And the opposite of 4, -4, is 4. So the opposite of 4 is -4. Now, take a look at your number line and make sure you know that division is ending at 0, where multiplication starts at 0.